a mutiny, a psychopath, and a brutal mass murder. It's a 400-year-old mystery.
Are you ready to explore the darker aspects of history? Today, we're delving into some of the most disturbing and mind-blowing discoveries ever made. This video will challenge everything you thought you knew. Get ready to be shocked, terrified, and forever changed. What did they do to his tongue? About 2,000 years ago, a man in Roman Britain was buried face down in the dirt. But before that, his tongue was removed. This gruesome find has left experts puzzled, calling it a unique form of mutilation. Some speculate that locals feared he might rise from the grave and start biting people, leading to the theory that he could have been considered a vampire. The burial site dates back to the 3rd century AD, a time when people in England lived in small farming communities under Roman rule. This period is important because Roman Britain wasn't known for strange burial practices. Such pre-burial mutilations were quite rare within the empire. Archaeologists have stated that this type of burial hasn't been documented before, making it a brand new discovery. To unravel this grim mystery, we need to examine every detail of the burial, starting with the man's position, face down in his grave. This burial style was typically reserved for those deemed despicable by society. If someone was considered odd, threatening, or a criminal, they would be buried face down as a punishment and a mark of shame. The removal of the tongue adds another layer of complexity. One theory suggests that he might have had mental health issues and bitten his own tongue off. If this is true, it's a tragic story of a man who may have been ostracized by his community for being different, leading to a deviant burial. Another theory proposes that his tongue was cut out for spreading slander or rumors. Archaeologist Simon May noted that ancient Germanic law codes included punishments like tongue removal for those who spread lies. While it's unclear if similar laws existed in Britain, it's possible this man had his tongue removed for telling unflattering truths about his neighbors. The final unusual detail is the flat stone placed inside his mouth. This isn't the first time researchers have encountered such practices. When Romans decapitated someone, they sometimes placed a pot in the empty space where the head should have been. They often replaced missing body parts with inanimate objects, perhaps to aid in reuniting the body in the afterlife. A Spanish massacre. About 2,000 years ago, around the same time, a man in Britain was having his tongue cut out. A horrific disaster was taking place in Spain. Researchers at the University of Oxford are trying to understand the brutality they discovered during a recent excavation. Warning: what they found is not for the faint of heart. Archaeologists studied 13 skeletons recovered from an ancient settlement called Lauya. 9 of the skeletons belonged to adults, 2 were teenagers, 1 was a child, and 1 was an infant, all of whom died around 365 BC. What shocked the researchers was the brutal way these individuals met their end. Some were decapitated, 1 had an arm ripped off, and none had been buried. Some remains even showed signs of burns. It's as if a group of angry giants had stormed through the Iron Age village, tearing people apart. Imagine how horrifying this scene must have been, leaving behind evidence of violence even after thousands of years. The researchers still don't know who the victims were or who attacked them. All they know is that this discovery has changed their understanding of the Iron Age, suggesting that Europe might have been more violent before the rise of the Roman Empire. In another grim discovery, archaeologists in Vilnius, Lithuania, faced a horrifying find as snow fell around them. They painstakingly excavated a mass grave from the partially frozen ground. What they pulled from the pit were bones, pieces of clothing, shoes, and buttons, all over 200 years old. The buttons helped identify the deceased as soldiers from Napoleon Bonaparte's Grand Army, who died in 1812 after Napoleon's ill-fated attempt to invade Moscow. As the French army retreated from Russia, they faced immense casualties. You might be surprised to learn that between the invasion and the retreat, the French lost more than 500,000 soldiers due to disease, harsh weather, and starvation. By the time Napoleon's forces reached Smolensk, only about 41,000 troops remained. Napoleon's army wasn't just French. It included Germans, Spaniards, Italians, Lithuanians, and Poles. When they pushed deeper into Russia, the Tsar refused to surrender. Unfortunately, Napoleon didn't anticipate the scorched earth tactics used by the Russians, who destroyed crops and towns to deny the French resources. With winter approaching, the original 675,000 soldiers dwindled to just a fraction. As they arrived in Vilnius, the soldiers found no food. Around 20,000 troops died from illnesses like typhus and hypothermia, and their bodies were tossed into mass graves. One of these graves, discovered in the suburbs of Vilnius, reminded everyone of the horrors of that time. This particular grave contained the remains of 3,069 individuals. Bioarchaeologist Rantas Jakas excavated them in under a month. The majority were men, but a few were identified as women, likely nurses, companions, or family members. Researchers from the University of Central Florida performed oxygen isotope analysis on the bones to trace their origins. The results showed that none of the deceased were locals. They came from Central Europe, with one woman identified as being from southern France. The analysis also revealed signs of advanced starvation, severe dental cavities, and evidence of stress and illness. 2. Many bones in the forest. In a hidden dig site deep within Poland's quiet forests, something truly shocking has been uncovered. Archaeologists are keeping this discovery under wraps for two main reasons. First, it's quite unsettling. And second, they want to prevent treasure hunters from raiding the site. 12 burial pits dating back to the 1st century BC, about 2,000 years ago, were uncovered. But these aren't just ordinary burial pits. They contain strange urns filled with the ashes of ancient warriors. Skeletons were scattered all around, revealing this site was an ancient cemetery used by Germanic tribes, located near the German border. Historians note that this area has seen many discoveries over the years, but this is undoubtedly one of the most unusual burial practices ever found. While finding a pit filled with skeletons in a European forest.
Now, these bones have been known about for a very long time. The site is visited by locals and by tourists and backpackers.
Isn't entirely surprising. The urns are particularly rare. To investigate further, archaeologists enlisted a veterinarian to X-ray the urns and see what was inside. It turned out they were filled with ashes, likely from Germanic warriors. However, an even more chilling find has recently come to light in another Polish forest. 300 headless skeletons from a more recent conflict.
Finding the bones of this many bodies from that period is highly unusual.
Polish researchers conducted an excavation in a dark, muddy area and uncovered a shocking number of bodies that had been buried just beneath the surface for the last century. When it was revealed that the forest contained a mass grave of German prisoners, archaeologists felt compelled to investigate. In a twist that raises many questions, these skeletons are believed not to belong to victims of the Nazis, but rather to the Nazis themselves. The theory is that these 300 skeletons are of German prisoners buried by the Soviets, though there's still much uncertainty since the records are unclear. Some experts think these remains could be from German workers who died while laboring at a nearby explosives factory. Adding to the mystery, many of the skeletons are missing their skulls. It's unclear whether this is due to grave robbers seeking treasure, construction work from a few decades ago, or something far more sinister: the woman without a face. In another shocking discovery, scientists are trying to understand why a woman found in the ruins of a castle is missing her facial bones. Archaeologists excavated the ruins of an imperial palace in the small village of Auleb, Germany, where they found two skeletons belonging to an elite couple from 1,000 years ago. Initially, everything seemed normal until researchers noticed something horrifying. The woman's facial bones were entirely missing. Project leader Felix Biermann stated that this wasn't due to grave desecration. Her grave had remained untouched for 1,000 years. So, what happened to her face? It's possible she suffered a severe accident or was a victim of something unimaginable. Next to her was the grave of a man buried with various items, including a knife, a knife belt, and a staff of office, symbols of high military rank during the Middle Ages. This suggests he was a military man, and since their graves are located near a medieval castle, they were likely of high status. In 2021, another elite medieval cemetery was discovered nearby with around 70 burials. But why were these two buried alone, and what happened to her face? Experts are just as puzzled as we are. If you have any theories, please share them in the comments. The horrors of a Roman prison. You often hear about Roman temples, tombs, palaces, villas, bathhouses, and military barracks being discovered. But what about prisons? Ancient prisons were terrifying places. Sure, some modern prisons, like those in Sweden, can be quite nice, but ancient Rome? Yikes! In Corinth, Greece, archaeologists have uncovered a chilling piece of ancient Roman history that could make your blood run cold. They might not have realized they were digging up a prison if it weren't for the eerie graffiti found on the floors and walls. Although historical records indicate that prisons were a common part of Roman life, very few have ever been studied. Now that one has been discovered, it's so creepy that some might think it's better to just forget about it. Matthew Larson from the University of Copenhagen mentioned that prisons existed in nearly every Roman town, but finding evidence of what these prisons looked like has been as challenging as finding a needle in a haystack. This makes the new discovery both exciting and a little unsettling. Inside the ruins, archaeologists also found fragments of ancient jugs and lamps, suggesting that the prison was dark and dreary. All these clues indicate miserable conditions that likely led to endless suffering for those imprisoned there. The whistles of death. Scientists have recreated what might be the most frightening sound in history. Thanks to the invention of 3D printing and some artifacts found in Mexico in the 1990s, experts have been able to bring this eerie sound to life. The exact purpose of the Aztec death whistle remains a mystery, but there are some theories. One idea is that it was used by shamans, possibly while under the influence of drugs, during ceremonies dedicated to the wind god. As the shaman blew the whistle, it produced a sound reminiscent of 1,000 banshees screeching at once. Once the eerie cries faded, the blood sacrifices would commence. Another theory suggests that Aztec warriors used the whistles as a form of psychological warfare in battle. Just imagine facing an army of Aztec soldiers, their faces painted, war clubs raised, and then suddenly hearing a noise that sounds like the screams of the damned echoing across the battlefield. You'd likely go from feeling nervous to completely terrified in an instant. When archaeologists discovered the whistle in 1999, they initially thought it was a toy. But that changed when researchers realized the whistle produced a sound similar to a chilling human scream. This led them to conclude that it was far from a toy. The whistle was found inside the temple of Ahuitzotl, clutched in the skeletal hand of a man who had been sacrificed over 500 years ago. It's believed that the whistle might have been used to help souls transition into the afterlife following a sacrifice. Now here's what the Aztec death whistle sounds like. Fair warning, be careful and make sure your volume isn't too high. It's a pretty unsettling sound. Imagine this sound, multiplied by hundreds, while you're hiding in the jungle at night, trying not to get sacrificed. It's as if the Aztecs discovered how to recreate the most terrifying, soul-sucking screech imaginable and then crafted a whistle out of it for their gods. A prisoner found on a mountain. During one of the darkest times in modern US history, 110,000 Japanese Americans were forcibly taken from their homes and placed in prison camps. Many Americans don't learn about this in school. This happened during World War II, when the country was focused on the threat of the Nazis. The US government feared that Japanese Americans could be spies, leading to their internment in camps. Recently, the remains of an artist who was imprisoned because of his Japanese heritage have been returned home to be buried with his family. In 2019, a hiker enjoying the outdoors stumbled upon something no one wants to find: skeletal remains on the slopes of California's second highest peak. These bones held the story of a man who disappeared decades earlier, Gichi Matsumura, a Japanese-American artist. In 1945, Matsumura was interned at the Manzanar camp, which held around 10,000 other prisoners. Located nearly 200 miles from Los Angeles, Manzanar faced harsh conditions with cold winters and hot summers, situated at 14,000 feet above sea level. Life in the camp was so difficult that men would sneak out at night to go fishing. During one of these trips, Matsumura became separated from his group. While he went off to paint alone, he got caught in a freak summer snowstorm. About a month later, hikers discovered his body, which had been buried on the mountain. However, his grave wasn't mapped, and over time, it was forgotten. Many people searched for his grave, but none succeeded. It was a random hiker in 2019, unaware of Matsumura's story, who finally solved the mystery. What's truly heartbreaking is that after Germany surrendered, and just days before atomic bombs were dropped on Japan, the prisoners at Manzanar were finally allowed to leave. Yet, only half of them chose to go home. Many Japanese Americans were terrified of facing racism and violence in the outside world, believing it was safer to stay in the mountains with their community than to return to society. Most of those in the camps had lost everything: their homes, businesses, and savings. The decision to remain in the camps was a complicated one, and it's a choice we hope no one ever has to make again today. Evidence of an ancient conquest. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of a conquest that took place over 2,500 years ago in Turkey, specifically in the ancient city of Sardis. They discovered human remains from the Persian invasion of Lydia, which is never a good sign unless you're an archaeologist. Among the findings were the skeletons of 2 soldiers who likely perished during this significant military campaign. Nick Cahal from the University of Wisconsin led the excavation team that dug through the ruins of Sardis. once a magnificent city and the shining capital of the Lydian Empire. This empire was one of the most powerful in history, known for its immense wealth. Sardis is believed to be where gold and silver coins were first minted, making the Lydians pioneers of currency. They ruled Anatolia until 546 BC, when the legendary Persian ruler Cyrus the Great invaded and defeated them, marking a pivotal moment in history. The turning point came at the Battle of Zimbra, where Cyrus's forces faced off against King Croesus's army of Lydia. Despite their riches and ability to hire mercenaries, the Lydians were no match for the Persians, leading to their defeat and the fall of Sardis. With this victory, the Persian Empire became the dominant power, spreading its cultural influence and destroying many once great cities. Now scientists are examining the skeletons to understand what life was like for those soldiers. They've confirmed that the remains belong to two young male soldiers in their early 20s, showing signs of trauma consistent with sharp weapons. This indicates that they met a violent end, likely by sword. Interestingly, one of the soldiers was found still clutching a rock, which might have been used as ammunition for a slingshot. Nick Cahal noted that this stone suggests the soldiers were actively engaged in battle when they fell. Rather than receiving proper burials, they were left among the ruins under a collapsed brick wall, alongside thousands of other soldiers as Sardis burned. A legendary Roman massacre found. Another grotesque mystery awaits resolution, this time in the Netherlands. A team of scientists from the University of Amsterdam has uncovered evidence of an ancient massacre that may have been carried out by soldiers of the Roman army. For years, archaeologists have been discovering scattered bones, rusted swords, and broken spearheads at a site in Kessel, close to the German border. It was clear that some form of conflict took place here, indicating a battle, but the exact details remained elusive. Recent findings suggest this was not a battle, but a horrific slaughter, allegedly orchestrated by none other than Julius Caesar himself. To understand the gravity of this event, we must travel back over 2,000 years to 55 BC, during the Gallic Wars. At the forefront was Julius Caesar, who commanded his troops to annihilate two tribes that posed challenges to Roman dominance. This act has since become infamous as one of the most despicable commands from any Roman leader. The two tribes, the Tencteri and the Usipetes, traveled from the east to negotiate with Caesar, fully aware of Rome's power. They pleaded for mercy, knowing that refusal would lead to their destruction. Caesar had the power to spare them. It could have been as simple as letting them go. Instead, he ordered his soldiers to execute them on the spot, leading to the complete erasure of both tribes from historical records. While this brutal episode in Roman history is well known among scholars, archaeologists have struggled to pinpoint its location. Now, scientists in Amsterdam believe that the artifacts unearthed may be linked to the massacre that took place in 55 BC. What are your thoughts on Julius Caesar? Hell on Earth. 101 years after their deaths, the remains of World War I soldiers have been uncovered in a German trench system, described by experts as a glimpse into hell on Earth. A total of 125 bodies were found, representing a mix of German, British, French, and South African soldiers. These remains were discovered precisely where the men fell during some of the fiercest fighting in World War I. Indeed, some of the most intense combat in any war. Unfortunately, I can't share photos of the skeletons, as the project's organizers have withheld all visual media out of respect for the deceased. What I can tell you is that the trench was located on a hill in a small Belgian village, It was covered up in the final days of World War I and remained buried until now. Archaeologists stumbled upon it while preparing the area for a housing development in 2015. Imagine discovering that your brand new condo is built over the remains of World War I soldiers. Some of the skeletons have been identified as belonging to soldiers as young as 15. Most of the deceased were German, and they likely fell victim to bullets or shell fire during the First Battle of Ypres in November 1914. The Germans held this hill, known as Hill 80, for several years after it was established as a German outpost in 1914. They maintained control until 1917, when British forces captured it. Due to their prolonged presence, the Germans dug an extensive network of tunnels underneath the hill. For many soldiers, Hill 80 was home, a place where they endured the horrors of war every day, living in a constant state of gunfire, explosions, and relentless attacks. It was like a waking nightmare, the skeletons with no skulls. When archaeologists recently opened a tomb in Sweden, they expected to find skeletons, but they were shocked to discover that none of the skeletons had any heads. This remarkable grave is one of the oldest ever found in Scandinavia, dating back to around 3500 BC during the early Mesolithic period. The burial site, located in Tarp, is marked by a large stone dolmen, one of the oldest in Northern Europe. Given the prominence of this stone monument, it's surprising that no one had excavated the area before. Inside the grave, the skeletons showed no signs of violent death or struggle, which raises a perplexing question. Where did the heads go? The research team, led by archaeologist Carl Göran Schren, confirmed that the burial site had remained untouched since the Stone Age. They ruled out theft as a possibility, suggesting that the skulls must have been buried this way intentionally. Schren indicated that the team is unsure whether this relates to a burial ritual or something even stranger. To add to the mystery, the skeletons were also missing their thigh bones. While they found plenty of hand and foot bones, teeth, and ribs, almost all the larger bones were absent. This discovery is quite unique and highly unusual. Typically, when excavating megalithic graves, it's the smaller bones that are missing, not the larger ones. The remains of about 12 individuals were found, ranging from small infants to elderly adults. They were likely farmers and may have been related. Archaeologists hope that further research will eventually reveal the missing heads, allowing them to solve this grotesque mystery. Parthian tomb. In October 2020, officials announced the discovery of a 1,000-year-old tomb in Iran's Kurdistan province. Inside the tomb, archaeologists found a human skeleton with a spearhead lodged beneath its ribs. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this find is that the remains were encased within a giant clay jar. The skeleton is believed to date back to between 247 BC and 224 AD during the Parthian era, and it likely belonged to a warrior who succumbed to injuries, as suggested by the spearhead. Project leader Shoku Kravi explained that in Parthian burial customs, large jars typically served as coffins. In this particular tomb, the body was placed inside 2 earthen jars. The Parthian Empire, also known as the Arsacid Empire, was a significant political and cultural force that spanned from what is now northeastern Turkey to eastern Iran. At its height, this powerful civilization exhibited a blend of Hellenistic and Persian influences in its religious beliefs, art, architecture, and customs. This unique grave is just one of several Parthian burials uncovered across Iran in recent years. Unfortunately, in a tragic twist, grave-digging machinery in a northern Iranian village unearthed an ancient grave in May 2020 while making space for COVID-19 victims. This grave contained ancient skeletal fragments, along with various artifacts from the Parthian era, including a sword, dagger, quiver, and arrows. The one-legged general. I'm about to share some words you probably never thought you'd hear. A DNA analysis was recently conducted on a one-legged skeleton found beneath a Russian dance floor. If you've heard of this anywhere else, I'd be quite surprised. It turns out that the one-legged skeleton belonged to a French general who was struck by a cannonball. And believe it or not, this general was part of the infamous failed invasion of Russia in 1812. The same one I mentioned earlier, involving Napoleon Bonaparte and his disastrous campaign. So, how did one of Napoleon's generals end up under a dance floor? Historian Pierre Melanowski led a team of French and Russian researchers in 2019 to search for the remains of General Charles-Antoine de Sablier, an important figure in Napoleon's life. Can you imagine fitting such a long name on a driver's license today? Napoleon and Sablier were close friends from military school, but their relationship became strained after Napoleon led his 600,000 soldiers to their deaths in an attempt to capture Moscow in August 1812. During the Battle of Altino near Smolensk, Sablier was hit by a cannonball. It was undoubtedly a horrific experience. He was injured so badly that his leg had to be amputated. With the French army already suffering from starvation, they were in no condition to care for their wounded. Unfortunately, Sablier's leg became gangrenous, and he passed away 3 days later. As for the dance floor, the general's remains were found beneath an outdoor dance venue in Smolensk Park. After he died, his troops cut out his heart to bring it back to France, leaving his body behind because they couldn't carry it. His heart was interred in a cemetery, and his name is inscribed on the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. Scientists confirmed it was his body through DNA, matching with that of Sablier's mother and brother. Thank you for watching. I hope you discovered something new today. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Goodbye.